Hello and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast. My name is Steven Railston. We're recording this episode on a Friday morning. In this episode, I'm joined by Samuel Luckhurst as usual, and we're going to get into the Barnsley game just briefly from Tuesday night, reflect on that result, digest the latest news around United, and look ahead to Crystal Palace on Saturday evening because, of course, United are travelling down to Selhurst Park for a 5:30 kickoff. Me and Samuel are making the journey. Samuel, my attendance was in doubt, but thankfully I'm making the trip. So you've got some company. Well, at the stadium at least. We're going down in different routes, aren't we? How are you to begin with?
Yeah, very well, thank you. As you know,
I mean, I already know because I asked you off, yeah, but it's a
yeah,
formality. It's not on a podcast, I think, when you open up. You were at Old Trafford on Tuesday night for that win over Barnsley. Like I say, we'll briefly touch on it because it was earlier in the week. But Samuel, what an uplifting night. We always kind of discuss Ten Hag and say one of the biggest criticisms, actually, is United never seem to win comfortably. And I know Barnsley are seventh in League One and they really are poor opposition. But it was just so refreshing to see United dispatch a team like that and to see key players Rashford, Garnacho, even Antony get goals. It was really good to see.
it was a perfect night. If you're a manager and you're plotting your course of a League Cup evening against a lower league side, that would be how it would go. It would be to dole out a thrashing, to have the game won by half time, to be able to make changes around the hour mark, and to actually sustain momentum as well. I suppose the only pity is that there wasn't a debut, there wasn't Harry Amas in the squad, but by being as strong as United were with their lineup and with their changes, that did ensure they scored more goals in the second half than they did in the first half, and they racked up another, rather spookily, I suppose, another 7-0 thrashing of Barnsley in 1997 in Barnsley's only Premier League season. They got walloped 7-0 at Old Trafford, so history repeats itself there. And key players, as you said, I'd hesitate to say that Antony is a key player, but it was good for him to get that pity penalty. But Rashford's a key player, Garnacho's a key player. Them being among the goals again was just positive. I said before the game, I thought Rashford should start because there was a chance he'd get a couple of goals and maintain the momentum from his breakthrough goal at Southampton. He did that. The obvious challenge is now to do it against a much tougher opponent in Crystal Palace on Saturday. Garnacho's mentality this season has been non-flawless, apart from his little social media activity last week. That could have blown up, but it blew over, mainly thanks to his performances at Southampton, coming on as a sub and then in midweek as a starter against Barnsley. And pretty much, you look at that squad now, I think only Tom Heaton, Ethan Wheatley and Harry Amas, of the players who are fit at the start of the season, they're the only ones who've not had a start so far this season. I think most players are in a very good place at the moment. The confidence is certainly coursing throughout the squad, and it has only been a 7 or 8 day period, but that's how it starts. You've got to start building momentum. You can only beat what's in front of you. United have won their last 2 games. They've won very well, and there could be a real belief that there is palpable momentum generating if they do get a positive result at Palace on Saturday. And a positive result would be a win. I don't think a draw would necessarily count as that. I know Palace are a pretty good side, and that they are a different entity, it feels like, at times when they play at Selhurst Park. But certainly if United were to get a win on Saturday, despite Palace's start, that would, it would be the cliched corner turn, I think, that people would be possibly referring to.
3 goals in 2 games for Marcus Rashford. There are definite signs of life coming back from Rashford now. I mean, that first goal, the touch was exquisite to take it down. A brilliant pass from Garnacho, and the finish was exceptional as well. On the commentary, they said it was vintage Marcus Rashford. I'm not going to get too carried away because I'm not going to say he's back just yet. But he is on the comeback trail, very clearly, Samuel. There was some clear positive signs, as I just said. He's doing things that he used to do in the 22-23 season, where he enjoyed the best year of his career. And it's so important that he gets back to those levels. That's what we said at the start of the season, that if he was going to be kept, he needs to bounce back. And if he doesn't, it'll probably be his last season at the club. But again, it's brilliant to see signs of life from Rashford, isn't it? After a really disappointing 12 months.
Yeah, and I think in fairness to him, and I said it last week, in the opening games, he was in the thick of it. He had 2 great chances against City. He had a great chance against Fulham and passed it up to pass to Garnacho. There was a disallowed goal at Brighton. Against Liverpool, he created two clear-cut opportunities. Then he got his goal against Southampton. Then another two goals in midweek. The stick he got against Liverpool was harsh. It was way over the top from quite a significant portion of the supporters that day. In fairness to those supporters, they were chanting his name. Those of them who travelled to Southampton and those of them who were in attendance the other night as well for that game. Fans are always going to be fickle. I think they're far more. A lot of fans certainly are far more inconsistent than us journalists are. But Rashford's approval ratings, he needed to lift them again, and the only way he was going to do that was by scoring and performing, and he has done that in the last two games. When he went through against Barnsley the other night, you just knew there was only one place the ball was going to end up, and you wouldn't have said that about him with those chances when they came to him against City, and when he went through against Fulham, you weren't sure. You couldn't be certain that ball was going to end up at the back of the net. And in the end, he didn't even take a shot at goal, which I thought was a worry and certainly a state of his confidence at the time. But Ten Hag spelt it out again for the 100,000th time in football history regarding forwards and confidence and lack of goals. There's nothing complicated about it. If they're on a dry run, they're going to lack confidence. And a goal can be a breakthrough, as we saw a little bit with Rashford in March when he smashed that one in against Manchester City, and then he scored in the next two games against, I think it was Everton, wasn't it, from the penalty spot, and then Liverpool in the FA Cup quarter-final. And that Liverpool goal was important for a number of reasons, but of course, he had that great chance right at the end of the 90 minutes with the final kick of the game, and he might have been offside, he may not have been, but it felt like a truly, it was a dramatic moment, and that was the game there. But then with United 3-2 down in extra time, he got the goal to make it 3-3, and that's what I suppose made it a surprise that he didn't, given that he had some momentum at that time and he was in the goals, that he didn't score again last season, and he ended the season on 8 goals. He's got 3 goals already for this season. At the risk of getting ahead of ourselves, I think it's safe to assume he will beat his 8-goal tally of last season. He certainly needs to do more than that. He needs, triple that number, I think, at least to, be nearing the territory where we're looking at it as a good season for Marcus Rashford. And he is capable of doing it. He's broken the 20-goal barrier in 3 campaigns with United. His skill set is an enviable skill set if you're a footballer. When you look at his directness, his pace, his goal scoring pedigree during his time at United, he's got it in his locker. And Ten Hag said some interesting things in the embargo section of the press conference as well, which also shed a bit more light on why it looks like Rashford is back to his old self. And if he has a good season, again, this is looking a long way on, he's got to have an even better season next season, because that is a bit of an issue with him. When you look at his form, there is an element of him being too hot and cold and too inconsistent. And this is a player who is turning 27 next month. But Ten Hag also
he's not young like Gary Neville suggested on his punditry recently. He's definitely not young.
Yeah, it's just, we called him a kid, didn't he? A kid coming through. Yeah,
I think he'd hold his hands up and admit that was a mistake, to be fair.
Yeah, nearer to 30 than 20. But
I feel like confidence, Samuel, is a legal performance enhancing drug. That's what it's like with Rashford, and he's the most confident player I've ever seen in my life. He is very streaky. We've talked about in the past, but when one goal comes, there's a spurt of goals, and you do see that with players. But with Rashford, it seems more exaggerated than anybody. And I think back to the summer when he missed out on the 33-man England provisional squad. He didn't just miss out on the actual England squad; he missed out on the provisional squad. That was a huge blow, and probably a big reality check to where he actually was, because he just wasn't good enough last season. He was far from the England squad, and I think that was the jolt that he needed. There's been talk each summer of Rashford, the preparation that he does and the work that he does. He goes out to America, doesn't he? He actually stepped back from social media, and I know obviously players have teams who look after their social media, but if he did actually come off it himself, put his phone away, delete the apps, I think that would have done him a world of good as well. Just completely reset and doing things right. And Ten Hag, after the Barnsley game, talked about his mood and how he's like around the training ground. I don't know if he discussed that in the press conference in the embargo section, but I thought that was really interesting, because clearly Rashford's in a different mood. He's back into that mood that he was in 2023, and it's a huge positive again.
Well, certainly you'd have had quite long odds back in May of Rashford and Ten Hag both being at United this season, primarily because it looked like Ten Hag was going to lose his job. And it'd have been interesting to know what Rashford's reaction was at the time when it came out that Ten Hag was going to stay. But he's not a daft lad at all. He will know that his most celebrated period of football came under Eric Ten Hag, and that was primarily because Ten Hag recognised that he's best from the left. I think it was Gareth Southgate who referred to him about 5 years ago as a wide raider. And Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, it was shortly after that Solskjaer kind of like kept Rashford there, and he went on a goal scoring run of form in October 2019. It would have been. The interesting thing about that goal against Liverpool last season in the Cup was that after that there was a 2-week international break. And going back to your point about confidence, it's relevant because that was obviously his final goal of that season. In the 21-22 season, he got that added time winner against West Ham that put United fourth going into incongruously an international break in January. So no football for 2 weeks. That was literally his final goal of that season. So that does show you he needs to strike while the iron is hot. Those goals came for him at great times and also terrible times because there wasn't any club football for him over the next 2 weeks. In fairness, in March, he went away with England, but he didn't play very often. Sorry, he didn't play much at all. I think he probably played about 15 minutes against Brazil at Wembley, and he was completely unused against Belgium. So you look at that period after he scored a hugely important goal against Liverpool, and his confidence has actually gone down because you got a sense then when Antony Gordon had come into the squad and other players were ahead of him that there's a chance he could miss out on the Euro squad here, given that he's just not been picked, not got a kick against Belgium in what was one of England's last high-profile friendlies before the Euros. So it's definitely, as you said, it's like a legal drug, confidence, and Rashford does need it. And it's an interesting dynamic he has with Ten Hag because Ten Hag isn't the most obviously warm of managers or coaches, and he's been quite brusque with him at times. He's disciplined him a few times and very publicly as well. So it's a good. It should it should be seen as a positive that Rashford, despite crossing Ten Hag a few times, he is still putting performances in now. You could count on probably one hand the amount of times he put a performance in last season. It did feel like their working relationship was at breaking point, but it is a new regime. There are some new changes around United, and I think when they're playing on the front foot as well, that does suit Rashford. I know that he can be very good in counter attacks, and maybe the manner of the first goal in midweek, some people would class that as a fast break because the move did move quickly, but it moved quickly because of the way he operated. And what was interesting as well was that a few moments earlier, Christian Eriksen had the ball and he played it left and it was intercepted, and Rashford was free to his right, and it was Rashford's body language. It was and you look at that and you think, well, how's this going to go? The next time he got the ball, he scored. And if you're going to respond like that, having not got the ball, nobody's going to give a toss about your body language. That's going to be seen as positive body language, if anything. But obviously, last season things often weren't going his way, and his demeanour on match days was certainly an issue. But hopefully, those days are over.
I wrote a positive piece on Rashford on Wednesday, and a fan tweeted me and said, "Come on, Stephen, hold your horses. It's been Southampton and Barnsley," and that's a fair comment. But he's moving in the right direction again. There'll be tougher challenges ahead, tougher assignments, but it can only be a positive, as I keep saying, that he's moving in that direction. Lastly, just in this part, then, Samuel, we'll give a mention to Antony briefly because we've given him a lot of flack on this podcast, and rightly so. He's been terrible in 2 years at the club. And you could probably make another joke that he only scores against lower league opposition. It was Newport County last season. It's Barnsley this season. But for him himself to score, I mean, it'll be a big relief. And again, it was a penalty, but it will do a lot for his confidence. Another caveat.
Pity penalty.
Yeah, another caveat. I just can't see him getting back into the team. I just can't see how it happens.
Yeah, I'd have happily not mentioned Antony really in this section. His 4 goals in nearly 18 months, his 4 goals since the end of the 22-23 season have come against League 2 opposition, League 1 opposition, a team now in the Championship and Liverpool, it's quite the eclectic mix. And Rashford was preparing to take that penalty the other night. Casemiro side all over to Antony as captain, and it seemed like he told him, like, you've earned it, you can take it. Rashford stepped aside. He took the penalty very coolly. A bit like he did at Newport, he absolutely milked the goal as well. And sometimes it's just got to be a case of you score and you just, you embrace teammates on the way back to the centre circle and you get on with the game. But
Yeah,
there was a lot of
media
hand
post.
gestures going on. There was
Uh,
something he did with Dallo as well, and you just think, look, come on, it is Barnsley, and you are, given your profile,
Lads, it's Barnsley.
Yeah. And someone again mentioned it yesterday about the Sonic the Hedgehog celebration after the Burnley game, which is, it's just a tribute to his son. It's something that he was pre-prepared, but how long was that Sonic the Hedgehog hiding there, given that was his first and only Premier League goal last season?
Didn't he lift up his shirt before the game at Molyneux last season, Wolves away, and he lifted up his shirt, he had a message on it. I think I've seen the tweet and someone saying it's the first
he
time
didn't score at Molyneux though, did he?
Well, that's the point. So it's the first player ever in history to lift up his shirt before the game because he knew he wasn't going to score. If I remember correctly, if that was the correct game. But it just shows you where he's at, doesn't it?
Yeah, unfortunately for him, he is just an easy target, and he gave quite a thoughtful interview to a few of us. Well, colleagues, three of us on tour conducted it, and then obviously it was shared around. It's common practice when you're on a tour and you speak to multiple players. It's not going to be 9 or 10 journalists around the player. It's going to be groups of 3 at times, and there was a group of 3 who did that chat with him, and he came across well looking at the quotes, and he was it was quite a moving interview as well, apparently, when he was reflecting on some of the hardships he's gone through in his life, and he was talking about making notes, and he's clearly driven and determined to succeed at United. But I still have my doubts it will happen. I mean, it will be my jaw will drop if he starts against Crystal Palace on Saturday, purely because there are 3 wings in the squad who are better than him, and he only scored in midweek because it was a pity penalty. And I'm not a big fan of those. I mean, United really did take a risk with Rashford's pity penalty against Everton last season because they were only 1-0 up at the time. It was early in the second half.
I quite like them. I think if players really struggling in confidence, especially with Rashford last season at Goodison Park, it just made sense. And if you can't,
but it didn't really work. It didn't really work with Rashford.
Yeah, you've got to try, I suppose.
And Ten Hag even looked surprised by that as well, because he was in the stands that day. I think he had a touchline ban for somehow accruing 5 yellow cards or 3 yellow cards, whatever it is. So there is always an element of risk with it, and sometimes it backfires. But I remember Mourinho insisting that Matthias Kesman take one for Chelsea back in 2004 against Newcastle as well. They were 4-0 up, and he'd been the big, or one of the big summer signings, still hadn't scored. And in fairness to him, he took a Panenka and he scored to make it 5-0 that day. But it didn't work for him. He didn't score many more goals for Chelsea after that, and I think he was actually sold after 1 season. So look, it worked the other night, but did it? In some ways, people look at it and see it as it's almost like a backhanded compliment for Antony. You can have a penalty against Barnsley because you did get a goal against a Football League side last season. But as I said, I think it's safe to assume he'll be back on the bench at Selhurst.
But if you are a Football League side and you do draw United in the Carabao Cup, you're trembling in your boots when Antony comes on the pitch, surely. He's got a great record against 3rd division and 4th division sides. We'll leave it there for part 1, and then the second part we'll look ahead to Crystal Palace. See you then. Welcome back to the Manchester's Red podcast. Now, as I said in the introduction of the podcast, we'll look ahead to the Palace game on Saturday evening. But to start with, Samuel, some good injury news. Rasmus Højlund and Mason Mount are back. I reported on Monday that Mount returned to training. I presume Højlund was probably the same, but official confirmation from the club came on Wednesday when they released photos of the pair back in training at Carrington. So that basically means that we've almost got the strongest squad available now, with the exception of Luke Shaw. I know Malacia is still missing in action, but we'll not
Lenny
forget
Yoro?
about him. Lenny Yoro as well. How could I forget Lenny Yoro? Do you know what?
I
I
know.
wrote that in a piece the other day as well, which makes it look even worse. That's not just in podcast form. You can forgive us for that as well, because he's made just one appearance, or two appearances in pre-season. So, look, Samuel, some good news going ahead of the game. Their availability is going to be decided on by Ten Hag. They're not officially going to be in the squad, but I expect them probably to be involved. If Højlund is in the squad, would you like to see him start, or do you think he should be eased back into action?
No, I think that would be illogical. The 20 game on Wednesday seems like the ideal opportunity to start Højlund and Mount, as Ten Hag used the Barnsley game midweek to give some players minutes by making 8 changes in that game. That's the benefit, if you can call it that, of being in the Europa League. It does allow you to give players opportunities who haven't had an opportunity, or in the case of Mount and Højlund, they've been injured. So that game's coming along at exactly the right time. I don't see any harm in putting both of them in the squad. I mean, Mount hasn't been out for too long. Is it, 3 or 4 weeks since
Brighton, yeah.
Brighton? So less than 4 weeks if you're going off the time he returned to training. So it's only been a 3-week absence, not necessarily long term. He's only missed 3 games. Højlund has been long term. That's been pretty much 2 months. I think it's 8 weeks since, almost 8 weeks since he did his hamstring in the 13th minute against Arsenal. And like, I think at Southampton last week, it's a pet hate of mine. I don't know why he does it, but Ten Hag did that thing of picking 2 goalkeepers on the bench again, and really, I don't see the logic behind it. I don't see why you wouldn't. He showed last season he did it with Louis Jackson or Habib Boganay or Harry Amas or Ethan Wheatley, or sometimes all 4 or 5 of them, with Collier as well being named on the bench. But just have another outfield player on. You never know what could happen in those circumstances. So, given the sorry, it wasn't last week. It was against Liverpool. I think it was 2 goalkeepers on the bench, not the Southampton game. It was the Liverpool game. So Toby Collier has been very heavily involved so far this season. There's, unfortunately for him, there's a reasonable chance that he may not even travel to Palace, purely because United have got such a full squad at the moment. And I'm sure a lot of supporters will think, God, when was the last time we had this full of squad? But I remember when we went to Brentford in March, looking at United's bench that day and saying, "Crack, it's a really strong bench." They're in a much better place now than they were before the March internationals. They had some good players back. I think Mount had just come back as well, and of course he came on and scored that evening. And it felt like, well, this is the start of a new period, so maybe they can have a strong run in and improve their form. And then, of course, they had the biggest thrashing in a draw that I've ever seen, and they all even dared to win it almost with that 96th minute goal. I mean, just looking at the bench that day, Heaton, Maguire, Martinez, Camboala, Amrabat, Mount, Ericsson, Casemiro, Antony. In terms of prominence, high profile, that's pretty good going, and that's an extremely expensive bench as well. And it will be a similar case at Palace this weekend. So that's, they're in rude health on that front. They have had a few injuries this season. They have still got some players out injured, but it's not looking as end of days as it was at various stages last season. I think this time last year, Lisandro Martinez he came out of the team, and then he didn't play until January, it would have been. So he was out for a very long time. And then other injury issues started to surface. I think at Burnley away, it was, you had Johnny Evans starting, didn't you? With, I can't even remember who his centre-back partner would have been that evening. Maybe Victor Lindelof. And there's a reason why we didn't mention Victor Lindelof earlier among the players who will still be unavailable for this weekend's game. So it's, there's an awful lot of positivity around United at the moment, which is refreshing after the last year. And the injury situation certainly adds to it, or lack of injuries, I should say.
And you're just talking about that Brentford game. I just remember Casemiro, Brentford were counter-attacking. Do you remember how slow he looked with his legs? And me and you just looked at each other and went, he can't get there. It was just a moment. I think
Yeah.
Brentford might have, came close to
He
scoring.
only
Had
came
so
on as a
many
sub
chances
as well in
game.
that game.
He did,
Yeah.
yeah. Which is pretty bad that he was still that slow. In terms of who starts in attack, I think it's a fascinating conversation I have, because you've got some wingers and players in some glittering form, some fantastic form at the moment. I think Rashford has to start for me on the left. And then there's obviously the debate about who starts on the right. I think Tyrone actually made the point earlier in the week that he would actually start Rashford down the middle, and that would mean shoehorning Ahmad and Garnacho in on the wing. I'm of the belief that Rashford has always been better off the left. I think he sulks a bit down the middle. I know you got away with it against Barnsley in midweek, but let's face it, they're not as good as opposition as Crystal Palace. So I'd start Rashford on that side, and I'd actually pick Ahmad Samuel over Garnacho. I think he had a really good performance against Southampton. And obviously, Garnacho did really well against Barnsley, but I think you've just got to stick with Ahmad. He's got the momentum, and I think Garnacho has the ability to change games off the bench. And if it's not broken, don't fix it. And it is working at the moment. I think Ten Hag's handling of Garnacho has actually been very clever. Let's face it, Garnacho will break back into that team at one point. He is going to make a lot of starts in the Premier League this season. So the situation with Garnacho starting on the bench in the Premier League is only temporary.
It is, because he's too good a player to be a super sub for 9 months running effectively. I kind of agree with Ty in that I'd take Xerxes out of the team, and I know that may seem harsh, and he is a striker, but he's not struggled for chances, but he has struggled for goals. He's had some really good opportunities. His only goal was the toughest chance that he's had. I think when the ball came to him, it didn't seem like an obvious chance, but he took it very well, which maybe gives you an idea as to how he could pan out as a striker for United if he is capable of scoring difficult opportunities where you don't have too much time to think about. And then when he has got time to think about it, he struggles. I think, speaking to a friend last week who follows Everton, he says the same thing about Dominic Calvert-Lewin, in that if he has time with a chance, he almost always doesn't take it. And unfortunately for Everton, that was to their cost at Villa last week when they were 2-1 up and he went through one-on-one. Rashford obviously was the striker midweek, but his goals came from the right-hand channel and the left-hand channel. The movement seemed very fluid in that front three. And I know it's not going to be that lineup at Palace, because obviously Antony will come out of it. But Fernandes has also got experience of doubling as a false nine. So if you can get players interchanging, I think it has got potential as a temporary front four for this game. I just think with Xerxes, can you rely on him going into this game to possibly be the difference? And if he starts and if he scores and United win, hats off to him. That'll have definitely been a corner turned for him. But I'm just loath to taking any of those three wingers out of the team at the moment, because they're all in to varying degrees in really fine fettle. Garnacho, I still maintain, I think he's United's best winger. I would not be dropping Ahmad. He was their best player at Southampton. The Man of the Match award, official Man of the Match award, predictably went to De Ligt because he scored and United got a clean sheet. But Ahmad was playing well when United weren't playing well. Rashford has started all games so far this season. I think he's probably the most, along with Andre Onana, he's the most certain starter this weekend. And Fernandes is the captain. So I'd certainly like to, I would absolutely not be against seeing United line up in a strikerless formation, because it's still a pretty gung-ho attacking quartet of Rashford, Garnacho, Ahmad and Fernandes. But Ten Hag is prone to spring in the odd surprise, as he did with Christian Eriksen coming into the team last week. I suspect again it will be at the very most one or two changes from the Southampton side. We're looking at midfield and what he's going to do there. It's got to be Kobbie Mainoo and one other. Logically, it should be Ugarte. I think Eriksen, by him starting and seeing out the game midweek, that all in a way it all but rules him out of the Palace game. I think it seems a bit of a stretch to start him in 3 games running. And also, he was dreadful at Palace last season, which made it a surprise that he was reunited with Mainoo at Southampton last week. And can you risk Casemiro in what is bound to be another intense game in what can be a febrile atmosphere at Selhurst? Yeah, I mean, he's pretty much known as the fall guy from that game, and that recent body cam footage from the referee has not helped matters as well. It's kind of it really is rubbing salt in the wounds for a player. Yeah, for a player who obviously was hooked 3 weeks ago at Liverpool after one of the worst 45-minute performances he'll have ever had, and effectively his first team status was revoked last week at Southampton. Ten
Yeah,
Hag had a
sorry.
minor dig. He had a minor dig at us in the week when he said, like, it's not right when you'll say it's dropped, it's rotation. Well, no, it isn't. In the week, none of us were saying those 8 players have been dropped. They'd clearly been rested. That was clear rotation. At Southampton, when Casemiro is named on the bench, having had the performance that he had against Liverpool, he has been dropped. That is one of the most cast iron definitions of a dropping in football. So Ten Hag he has to manage Casemiro quite carefully. He needs to try and keep him motivated, and there will be Premier League games that he will end up starting this season just because of the way a season pans out with injuries and suspensions and rotation and whatnot. But Saturday is not a game to be starting him, and neither is Tottenham the following weekend, or Villa the weekend after that, I may add.
Yeah, I'll give Xerxes another chance. I'm not exactly being particularly convinced by him individually, but when you win 3-0, I know he didn't score a goal. I don't think your attack should be changed. And I think Garnacho has got a little bit of an edge of coming off the bench at the moment because clearly he's not happy, which he wouldn't be. And I think that's adding to his performances when he's coming on. He's got a point to prove, and he is making it. He is making it.
I thought, in fairness to Xerxes, his play on the ball was the best I've seen from him. I mean, against Liverpool, at times he looked like someone who didn't know what football was in the first half. It was a classic case of stage fright. His use of the ball was dreadful. In the second half, he was a bit better. He seemed a bit more alert, and he had those chances. And I thought at Southampton, after he should have scored that opportunity where he seemed to scuff it. He should have got a flash of contact on the ball. But I thought his general play was pretty decent. And if he'd got a goal, you'd have come away from it thinking he's had a good game today, a really good game. And then we wouldn't have been, I don't think we'd be certainly debating his position in the team going into this weekend's game.
Something we will agree on, I know for a fact, is that Diego Dalot should return to right back this weekend. He played there against Barnsley, obviously, and Toby Collier was at left back. But so far this season, Dalot's played on the left and Mazraoui's played on the right. That's the way Ten Hag's preferred to play them. I think Dalot's he's not as usual himself. And he obviously conceded that penalty in the first half against Southampton. He's been run ragged, really, at left back. I think he is really struggling there. So I think it really is imperative that he returns to that side where he is most comfortable. And it's interesting because Dalot is versatile. He obviously can play on the left, but he's just not been at the races, has he, Samuel? He's not been given the best account of himself.
No, Tyler Dibbling was terrific against him last week, and he did him a couple of times for that shot that was saved by Anan, and obviously for the penalty that he won. And I looked at Mazraoui's record at left back under Ten Hag. Ten Hag only started him there twice, according to. I know it's not always accurate. It's certainly very inaccurate with transfer fees, but in terms of positioning, Transfer Markt tends to track players' positions reasonably accurately, and it had Mazraoui down the starting only twice at left back for Ajax under Ten Hag, and he didn't start or play at left back for Ten Hag in their final 2 years together at Ajax. So I suspect it will again be Mazraoui on the right and Dalot on the left, because Dalot has a lot more experience of playing there in his career, and also under Ten Hag, he ended the last season obviously playing at left back. And he can play well at left back. I thought he was brilliant in the FA Cup final, but pretty much everyone in the United shirt was brilliant that day. It wasn't a reliable gauge of their performance level last season under Ten Hag, but he clearly feels like he has an element of trust in playing Dalot there, which is fine. But it does blunt United somewhat, and it's just as well that Michael Olise won't be in a Crystal Palace shirt this weekend. It'll be interesting to see how Palace do with that dynamic, because I'm not convinced that Eddie Nketiah is going to, be successfully rebranded as, a striker turned winger behind.
When you look at that purple patch in the sprint,
Mateta.
when it went on that run, and obviously it included the 4-0 hammering of United, was it Oliver Glasner, or was it just Michael Olise having an absolute phenomenal spell? He's now at Bayern Munich. He's not going to
Eze was
yeah, and Eze
wasn't
well.
as terrific as well. Mateta. Mateta
Yeah,
started
he was in
scoring, didn't
form
he?
with that annoying goal music. Hopefully, we don't hear that on Saturday evening. But Joachim Andersen's left. He made the kind of sideways step to Fulham.
Yeah.
He's played for them previously. So they've lost two key players there. They've not started the season well. United have clearly got more of a chance of winning this Saturday. I actually quite fancy them.
I do. I do as well. It's as it always happens in football. A couple of results or one result can change one's perception of the next game coming up. And Palace haven't won a game yet this season, and they don't look as imposing a team as they were last season, certainly. And that is inevitable because Olise's gone, and they've not brought in a dynamic player who is going to get. Nketiah did a decent job at Arsenal, and Arsenal got a very good fee for him, and Palace could trumpet it as a coup or what have you, but he's not at the level of Olise, and I don't think he ever will be. So that dynamic, how he's going to fit in, it's one to watch. It's not necessarily going to be a guaranteed success there. And as you said with Joachim Andersen, I mean, I hesitate to say it's a sideways move because I'd much rather be going to Craven Cottage this weekend
Yeah,
than
but you love Craven
Selhurst
Cottage.
Park.
I always make that joke
Look,
if I'm on the blog, Samuel, and
I
you're
know
approaching Craven Cottage. What's that park called at the approach?
Bishop's
Because you
Park.
always that's it.
Yeah,
Because you always love strolling through that on a leafy
walk
Saturday
by the
afternoon.
walk across. Yeah, get off at Putney Bridge, walk along the Thames, go through Bishop's Park, and yeah. It's the only bad memory I have of that was when they played there in January 2021 during COVID. It was dark at 4 o'clock. It was the most miserable weather. It was a miserable time. In just modern world history as well, unfortunately, and
And is your
it
best
really
memory
was kind
Rich
of
dropping the
appropriate.
pick and mix in the press box at Craven Cottage?
I unfortunately I was not present for that. I just because I was off the following week, but I made a point of downloading the podcast just so I could listen to his perfect anecdote as he regaled that. But I knew exactly which Fulham employee who he was referring to, who was particularly disgruntled by his the way he went about trying to get his pick and mix, and obviously it didn't end well. So
There's
yeah,
always stories
maybe
from
Joachim.
away days, isn't it? I mean, your
There
story
tend
when
to be,
you
yeah.
what was it with the car ticket? You had one, obviously. Myself with Captain Birdseye at Bournemouth, and then Rich with a pick and mix. So you're
Captain
doing
Birds,
away
yeah,
day
Captain
Chronicle
Birdseye
podcast at one
was,
point.
yeah, Captain Birdseye was not at Southampton last week. I was bracing myself because I did the mix zone, and I had my own run in with him in a mix zone a couple of years ago. But no, I say it with full malice intended. Hopefully, he's not on the beat anymore. He's not a pleasant person whatsoever,
No, he's definitely not.
as you know better than I do.
Yeah, if you can dig out that podcast, it was after the Bournemouth game in April. It's probably worth
Bournemouth game.
skipping to at the end. Yeah. Samuel, I hope we're glad all over on Monday and we've watched an entertaining game.
There you go.
There you go. Thanks for your time as usual.
Thank you as always.
And thanks to listeners. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the game. We'll be back on Monday. Take care.